The league just had its biggest blockbuster trade ever, and the Jazz were a part of it. What does it mean for the NBA, and what does it mean for the Jazz? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. I'm excited and honored to have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. As many of you guys know by now, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Draft Combine, Utah Jazz broadcast assistant, statistician, and lover of basketball, both collegiate and pro. So don't expect all the geeky numbers to be gone that you're so accustomed to with David. But I'll bring a unique perspective as a diehard hoops fan, Jazz fan, and someone who doesn't necessarily give you the same cadence and approach each and every time like David does, but will tell you the truth of the team that I adore and what I want to see from the Jazz and what I am seeing attending every single home game for the past 4 seasons. And I'm hopefully able to make you more and more knowledgeable about your Utah Jazz. So thank you all for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. Remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, who won the trade? The big trade, and why? So please answer that on YouTube, and I'll try to engage with you there. Today's show is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDONNBA. All righty, in the first segment, I'll go through the NBA landscape-altering trade in which the Jazz played a small part, as well as discussing the prior trade where the Jazz sent away Patty Mills and Drew Eubanks to the Los Angeles Clippers, and we'll talk about the ramifications of the big trade. In the second segment, I'll discuss the ramifications for the Utah Jazz, specifically of the massive trade involving Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis in the short term and in the long term. And I'll discuss what could be next for the Utah Jazz, address some rumors, and give you my personal thoughts on what the Jazz should do and what I kind of expect they will do. And in the final segment, we'll preview the Jazz and Pacers, which will be happening this evening once you guys are listening to this in the morning on Monday. And that's at the Delta Center. So if you guys are at the game, I'll see you guys there. All right, let's dive right in. First and foremost, that's the biggest trade that's ever happened in the NBA. Flat out craziest trade I've ever witnessed. And upon researching further, it's not just because I'm young. It's not just, oh, you've only lived 24 years. You don't know about the trade that happened back then. I researched a ton. And this trade only became more historic in my eyes, and my perspective did not shift as I researched more and more. So we'll get to that thought in a moment. The trade is as follows. In case you're living under a rock and you didn't see this, the trade is the Luka Doncic. The guy who is 25, top 5 player in the world, has been traded from the Dallas Mavericks, and they instigated the trade. That's the crazy part. Luka heads to the Lakers along with Maxi Kleber and Markieff Morris. The Mavericks give up Luka. What do they get back? They get Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a Los Angeles Lakers 2029 first-round pick. The Jazz, our Utah Jazz, they receive Jalen Hood-Schifino, a 17th pick from the draft that had Keontae George. Keontae went 16th. 2025 Clippers second-rounder and a 2025 Mavericks second-rounder. The Jazz also sent about $55,000 to each of the Mavs and the Lakers in order to give up something to receive what they received. So now back to the thought of how insane this trade is. It really is one of the craziest trades in all of sports. But in terms of basketball, I researched all the biggest trades. Is this really bigger than Wilt getting traded from the San Francisco Warriors to the 76ers in his primes for a bunch of role players? Maybe. But I'd still say so because of the landscape of today's game. Like the games today and the players, the stars, they control a ton. But Luka Doncic was happy in Dallas. That's the key component to why this trade is crazy. Luka Doncic had just gotten Dallas to the finals for the first time. He was expecting to have a statue built in Dallas. And Mark Cuban even said, if I were asked to divorce my wife or keep Luka Doncic, I think I'm keeping Luka Doncic. Like, that's how great he was. So, Wilt Chamberlain, if that's the barometer for, hey, is this bigger than Wilt trade? Well, you're doing something right. Luka Doncic. So you may ask, hey, you're pretty young. Do you know about the Kareem trade? Well, Kareem had an MVP and a title already under his belt in Milwaukee, and he got moved from Milwaukee to LA. And then there's the Julius Erving from the Nets to the Sixers. Well, the short answer is both were disgruntled and wanted out. The Nets had no money for Dr. J, and Kareem didn't want to be with the Bucks. He asked out. So if you're asking out, I don't find it as crazy because typically when a star is traded, we know it's going to happen. Like, speaking in the short term, the Jazz, maybe not as big a star, certainly not as big a star. We knew Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert trades were going to happen because of the frustration that was circling the locker room, that all the news, the rumors, you knew that there was trades. Donovan, was he going to New York? Oh, the holdup's Quentin Grimes. Okay, it's Luka Doncic. Haven't heard a peep. That's a global superstar, and you didn't hear a peep about being disgruntled or wanting out. And he was traded, and the team that instigated the trade was the Dallas Mavericks. Other big ones that are modern. The Wolves sent Kevin Garnett to the Celtics. They ended up winning a championship with Ray Allen arriving from Seattle. Boston formed the Big Three. That's a big trade. Not as big as this one. The Nuggets sent Carmelo to the Knicks. Melo is the certified scorer. He was just sent to the biggest market in the NBA, arguably. Not as big a trade. Lakers sending Shaq to the Heat. He was a massive presence, but not for that much longer. And he did help Miami win the title. But those are Hall of Famers I just listed. And they all sold tickets. They all were great. But here's the difference. Luka was traded for Anthony Davis, an MVP candidate. That's why it's enormous. Like, it's not all about Luka. Anthony Davis isn't as good as Luka Doncic, but he is a 4-team, first-team All-NBA guy, a perennial top 5 defender in the world, and someone who can give you 28 and 10. It's the first time 2 All-NBA players have been swapped for each other in the middle of the season ever, per the Elias Sports Bureau. But one is 25 years old and has more first teams to his name than the guy who is 7 years his elder and was also a number 1 pick. No slouch, Anthony Davis, but he's not Luka Doncic. Luka, just to dive into this further, Luka Doncic has 5-team All-NBA first teams in 6 completed seasons. And he was traded and wasn't portraying malcontent, disinterest for a guy who's an inferior older player for short-term goals. Insanity. Absolute insanity. This also may have reset the trade market that became so ridiculous that had Mikal Bridges fetching 5 first-rounders along with Bogey, or Gobert for the Jazz getting 4 firsts and a pick swap. So with that said, all of that said, Dallas better win a title. And even if they do, I'm not sure it justifies sending a transcendent star at the age of 25 years old away. Now let's talk about the Jazz. The Jazz received Jalen Hood-Schifino, a 2025 Clippers second, a 2025 Mavericks second. And this comes just a bit after the Jazz sent Eubanks and Mills to the Clippers for PJ Tucker and Mo Bamba, who has since been waived. My immediate takeaways are, I think it was a shrewd move of Danny Ainge and the rest of the Jazz to acquire second rounders that take the place of the first that the Jazz recently dealt to the Suns. For a refresher, the Suns acquired the least favorable first-round pick in 2025 of the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Minnesota Timberwolves, or the Jazz, and the Jazz one is protected, so it's going to be the Cavaliers. In 2027, Cleveland, Minnesota, or the Jazz, and that could be anyone's, but probably the Cavaliers. And in 2029, Cleveland, Minnesota, or Utah, once again, could be any of the teams. Hopefully, the Jazz are at the top of the West, and they're sending their own pick. That means it's been a success. But the Jazz replenished their stock and got picks that are not as good as first-rounders, but they also don't have the monetary weight of first-rounders. So the Jazz lose 3 first-round picks and gain back second-rounders in these deals happening over the weekend involving the Clippers and the Lakers. The Jazz got back 2 second-round picks, which right now sit at 47 and 51. They may be used to put in the cupboard and store for later. They might be in further moves, such as, what if PJ Tucker sent in a deal? Maybe those are just toss-ins to the trade, incentivize players. And then there's PJ Tucker, who the Jazz, I think it's important to note, have not waived yet. It was Mo Bamba. Now that leads to the question of what's next. And I tend to think there's more to come before the deadline for the Utah Jazz, which we'll further discuss coming up next segment. And before it's too late, let me just tell you what there is to know about Jalen Hood-Schifino, because you're saying, wait, he was picked right after Keontae George. That's right. Yeah, he was drafted 17th by the Lakers after a stellar freshman year at Indiana. And that's a pick after Keontae and a pick before Jaime Jaquez in last year's draft. Getting him isn't that big a deal. It really isn't. Zach Harper of The Athletic said, and this is blunt, but this is, I think, pretty accurate. Regardless, this is what bad teams with cap flexibility are supposed to do. Absorb contracts and get some picks in the process. That is what this is. Nothing more, nothing less. Jalen Hood-Schifino has seen very limited time in the NBA and has only played 123 minutes total in a year and a half. And he was taken with the 17th pick. So not a lot of time to develop. He's playing on the Lakers. I get it. But the Indiana products just shot 23% in those minutes. But he could find a bigger opportunity with the Jazz. He was considered one of the better pick and roll players in his class coming out of college. But he lived in the mid-range. And the PJ Tucker part of this, him still being on the roster makes me curious, especially now that there have been even more trades, such as De'Aaron Fox. As I was prepping to do this show, De'Aaron Fox was traded to San Antonio, Zach LaVine to Sacramento. I'll dive into that in the next segment as well. I believe the Jazz may have another deal on the horizon, maybe imminent, might even be something that happens by the time you're listening to this after I've recorded it. We'll discuss that and much, much more, as well as the ramifications of this monumental deal next. Looking for tickets to the next big event that you want to go to? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime Picks, it has never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Gametime Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. I got US Open tickets this summer, recently got concert tickets on Gametime, and all of these things hold up, whether it's a concert or a tennis or is it basketball. Tried it for all of them, nothing but success. So I recently grabbed a super deal for a prime seat, and I couldn't believe the value. It was a steal, absolute steal. And the seat view feature is a game changer. You don't want to sit behind a pillar while watching a baseball game. So before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like at the venue. It's so reassuring for someone like me who loves the sports and cannot tolerate something blocking my view of the game. And the best part, you're covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options should something come up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. So download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And I also want to tell you guys about Murdoch's Chevy. In fact, Murdoch has been in Utah for over 80 years, and they're a great family. They own a lot of locations. Chevy is as American as it gets. So if you think of an old Western movie and a truck's rolling down the road, it's a Chevy. There's multiple locations in Utah, both in Woods Cross and in Logan, and the great lineup of Chevy trucks has everything you could ask for the winter weather here in Utah. Or if you want to cruise down the highway on a trip down to sunny St. George, the Chevy trucks can do it for you. The Colorado and the Silverado. And then if you're not necessarily a truck guy and you want something maybe sleek and newer, maybe a midsize, the amazing lineup of SUVs with the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazer, the Equinox, the Trax, all available. And you can go to the website and see the latest deals and the inventory updated live at Murdoch Chevy. So get yourself a Murdoch Chevy and tell them we recommended you here from Locked On Jazz. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, filling in for David Locke, and we are still talking trades and how they impact the Utah Jazz presently and in the long run. And to be honest, the biggest takeaway I have is the Jazz probably are frustrated that the Lakers made a move that only the Los Angeles Lakers can make. And what I mean by that is the Jazz had a 2027 first-round pick from the Los Angeles Lakers that only had top 4 protection, meaning that if it was 5 through 30, the Jazz would inherit the pick from the Lakers. And they still will, But when you get Luka Doncic, you're probably not picking in the lottery. And that's frustrating for the Jazz. So that's the biggest ramification from this trade. It's not inheriting Jalen Hood-Schifino. It's not getting those 2 second rounders. It's that the first rounder in 2027 is now less of a valuable commodity. Could the Jazz have used it as a trade piece? Possibly. Or they could have used it to draft a player that really factored into the future. Because right now, the Jazz are a step behind from some of these young teams. Like, look at the Thunder. They're the best team in the West right now, and they're one of the youngest teams in the NBA. So the Jazz need to hit on some draft picks, and they need to find internal development. The 2027 first rounder was valuable, both in terms of finding a way to accelerate the process and find potentially a guy who could really help you. The Los Angeles Lakers have Luka to carry the torch. That pick once looked very valuable because LeBron James, as amazing as he is, Father Time is undefeated. He's no longer the best player in the world. And that's hard for me to admit as someone who adores LeBron James. Anthony Davis, injury prone. So you have 2 years of the Lakers being not good. It's not that they're not good. It's that they're not great. And I think the Lakers have such a proud tradition that they would have tried to fight through with LeBron and AD, make some short-sighted moves to try to extend their window. And the Jazz could have been sitting on a lottery ticket. And now the Los Angeles Lakers do something only they can do and go get one of the preeminent stars of our sport, Luka Doncic, to carry the torch and carry the Lakers probably out of that lottery where the Jazz were hoping to snatch the lottery ticket. So that pick that was top 4 protected and we thought could be a top 10 pick now likely sits in the 20s. That's the biggest impact of any of the trades that the Jazz have made. So while saying that about Luka, it makes me think of this quote from Nico Harrison, the Mavs general manager, at the end of the presser discussing this deal. And you got to imagine he's under a bunch of fire. He said, and I quote, "The future to me is 3 or 4 years down." Let me restart that. The future to me is 3 or 4 years from now. The future 10 years from now, they'll probably bury me and Jason Kidd by then. Or we'll bury ourselves. That does not sound like someone who feels super confident about trading Luka Doncic, and nor should he. That seems like risky business to me. And then on the flip side, to put a bow on this deal and move on to the Jazz trade rumors, speculation, what's next for the Jazz that has some legs, here's the final thought. The Los Angeles Lakers flipped Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, and Brandon Ingram, and what ended up being 4 first-round picks for a championship that won by Anthony Davis alongside LeBron James in the bubble and Luka Doncic. Let me reiterate that. They sent 3 promising talents, Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram. Strangely enough, the one who's most effective right now is Josh Hart. And then 4 first-round picks for a championship and Luka. Just think about that. That is shrewd moves embodied. Well, while this trade took the headlines, and deservingly so, De'Aaron Fox was also, while I was preparing for this, dealt to San Antonio, and I think that could open up trade opportunities for the Utah Jazz. The trade went as follows. De'Aaron Fox and Jordan McLaughlin to the Spurs. The Kings received Zach LaVine, C.D. Sissoko, 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, and the Bulls received Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, and their own 2025 pick, which the Spurs previously had via the Bulls. I believe this clearly leaves teams needing to fill out their rosters, both in terms of cap space and in terms of positional need. And the Jazz have multiple players capable and with the monetary price tag that is conducive to making these deals. And that's especially important with these massive deals relocating and reallocating money for different teams. So I don't expect a blockbuster from the Jazz. I don't. Like, you're not going to match this. No one ever was. But I don't expect something massive. But all these moves make little sense that the Jazz are making if they don't have a larger plan at hand. I mean, they're shrewd moves. You get an extra pick. But that's small ball. I don't think small ball is crazy. But I do think there's something more that seems to be happening. There's a lot of Twitter rumors. I don't know what to make of it being true or not. But I just have a sense that something more is going to happen. So we've heard the rumors all year. John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton are on the block. They've been on the block forever. And I think the amount of movement in the NBA encourages more movement and opens new suitors up for those 3. I've said to friends for a while, and you know, maybe this is something that's been on Twitter, but I've thought this for a while privately, that once De'Aaron Fox was on the market and got dealt like he did today, that Colin Sexton could be someone that the Kings look to replace De'Aaron Fox with. It's not necessarily a win now move, but you just need something to promote the team internally. Like this team is not terrible. They don't believe they can win. That's why they're resetting. But they do have Domantas Sabonis. They do have some players. And I could see that Colin Sexton would fit in there. And it's not the only player that the Jazz have had rumored to go to Sacramento. John Collins was heavily linked with Sacramento before the Fox trade. So maybe he's still a candidate to go to Sacramento. Maybe not. Maybe that's changed the priorities for the Kings. Sexton, speaking of a guy, like I said, I think he might go to Sacramento. That's just my personal hunch of what these moves, if the Jazz are involved, that would be the one that makes the most sense to me. Sexton's also drawn intrigue from Orlando because of their desperate need for scoring, as we saw the other night, as they are inept offensively. Clarkson would be an interesting piece for some teams needing a spark plug of scoring and veteran experience to score and lead in a playoff situation. He's shown he can do so in many playoff series alongside Donovan and Rudy. I do think Walker Kessler, a lot of people said, are the Lakers' next move, is it to get a center? Maybe it makes sense. You lost Anthony Davis. You need someone to fill in. Your starting center, is it Jackson Hayes right now? Walker Kessler is certainly a name that draws intrigue. I would guess Walker Kessler will not be traded because Walker Kessler's been great. He's very young, and I don't know what the Jazz would get from a team that wants Walker Kessler, meaning they're a winning team. So what's the winning team going to give the Jazz that's more valuable than Walker Kessler? And you got to think about winning these trades. So I'm going to guess he's off the market, but then again, Luka Doncic just got dealt. Everything's off the table. So my true assessment is that the Jazz will look to ship off any of Colin Sexton, John Collins, or Jordan Clarkson, but they're not getting market value. And that's why the fact that it's likely pennies on the dollar. And I mean, and the thing that exemplifies this is that Mike Conley, who is a really, really good player and immediately helped the Timberwolves, only fetched pennies on the dollar. He only got us a pick. Malik Beasley didn't fetch much value either. So you look at that and you look at these guys who they're known commodities around the NBA. John Collins has been playing well. He's shooting 45% from three. That's fifth best in the NBA. Rebounds well, plays hard, but unfortunately on good teams, he struggled. The label was out when he was in Atlanta. He was overpaid. It's a lot of money. Colin Sexton's never played on a winning team. He's a 6'1", 2 guard who doesn't necessarily contribute to winning, or at least hasn't at this point. He was efficient. All of last year has been streaky this year. So he's helped himself. He's been good, but I think there's skepticism from teams trying to improve their roster, trying to go for these players who haven't been necessarily conducive to winning in winning situations. Then you look at Jordan Clarkson, who has been very good in a winning situation, but is older. You got to pay him some money. And what are you going to give back? And the other part of this is all these guys have money that matches in big contracts and part of big deals. But these teams that are really good have to be clever about how they spend their money. They have to be intelligent about how they build their rosters, especially with the new agreements. And so the amount of money that all of these Jazz players earn is tricky to trade for because then you have to give a similar amount back. And that means you likely have to give up a player that you find useful. So that's why I think it's difficult to imagine all these guys getting traded, even two of them being traded. My hunch is one of the three gets traded. And if not one of the three, I would believe it might be zero. And that's hard to swallow because the Jazz fans have really been eager to get a pick for these guys. And I just don't know if the market is allowing that, if Luka Doncic only got one pick, along with Anthony Davis, of course. So that's my hunch. Tell me what you guys think about that, because I'm not certain, but that's just the read I get being around the arena, thinking about it, reading the Jazz Twitter, talking with people I know. So let me know what you guys think there. But coming up next, the Jazz host the Indiana Pacers, and I'll be there to cover it at the Delta Center and let you guys know what I'll be watching out for and some stats to set the guidelines and expectations for what I expect and what maybe you guys should expect from the Indiana Pacers when the Jazz host the Pacers. But first, a word from PrizePicks. Basketball season is heating up, and boy, is it, as we just talked about with the trades. And there's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, PrizePicks makes it easy and fun to turn your sports knowledge into real money. And here's how it works. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yeah, that's right, 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at the board and selecting more for Jason Tatum on points and more for Luka Doncic on assists as it looks to ingratiate himself nicely to the Los Angeles Laker crowd. The best part, PrizePicks keeps it simple. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast, secure withdrawals mean you can get paid quickly when you win. Plus, their Taco Tuesday promos give you discounted player projections, even more value included. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners, big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. That is insane. Only on PrizePicks. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin with you here. And this weekend has been so crazy with trades. It's hard to believe that games have been played. And with all this player movement, that there are things happening other than Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis being traded. I'm frazzled. I'm bamboozled. Absolutely astounded that this happened. But the Jazz do host the Pacers, and the Jazz are actually coming off of a win. So here are 3 things I'm looking forward to watching and expecting while attending this game. Firstly, the Jazz beat the Magic last game, breaking an 8-game snide. And that's largely because the Magic are inept beyond belief offensively. Like, putting it simply, they cannot score, and the Jazz can. The Jazz can score and have showed offensive flashes. And with the palpably faster pace that the Jazz are playing with Isaiah Collier at the helm, the Jazz can score with teams, but they're terrible on defense. The Jazz are the worst defensive team in the NBA. But right now, the worst defensive team in the NBA can beat a team that is the worst offensively, like the Magic. The Magic did not expose the Jazz's lack of defensive capability. And, if you're the worst defense and they don't expose it, that's on them. Well, Indiana, they are not terrible on offense. In fact, they're quite good. They score 116 points per game, a little bit more than that, in fact, and are 8th in offensive rating and play at a pace that is very quick with Tyrese Halliburton running the show. Halliburton, by the way, almost has a 5-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. It's not one of the things I'm looking out for, but as someone who grew up playing the point guard, I always looked at that stat and I thought, wow, 3-to-1's great. And it is, but 5-to-1 is gaudy. So Halliburton, the Pacers play quickly. The Pacers, last 10. You just want to get a quick recap of what they're doing. Well, they're 8-2 in their last 10. They're 27-20 on the year, meaning they're playing their best basketball right now, averaging 120 points per game. And they're starting to really swing the ball around well. 31 assists per game in their last 10. Their opponents have averaged 111 points per game, so they're outscoring their opponents by about 9 points per game. And the Pacers are shooting over 50% from the field in this 10-game stretch. Indiana, in fact, has scored 132 points or more in each of their 3 last games where they are on a 3-game winning streak, and they're averaging 134 points in those games, shooting 54% from the field and over 43% from 3 in that span. So the Pacers, they're really clicking right now. And if they score 130 points, which, it's possible with the Jazz's defense being pretty inept, they're 7-0. And if they score 120 points, like they've been averaging for the past 10, they're 15-1. So keys to the game, the Jazz need to pick up their defense, and hopefully the Pacers miss a little bit. Well, that's all tongue-in-cheek in terms of the keys to the game. But the Pacers have been very good in all aspects of the game. They've outscored their opponents by 10.1 points per game the last 13 outings and have averaged over 120 per game for those 13. Defensively, they've limited the opponents to 110. So same situation. It's been a prolonged stretch. 13 games or 10, whatever you want to take it from. They're shooting really well, and they're holding their opponents to lower shooting percentages than they have all year, and they're shooting better themselves. So that equates to winning. So I expect this game to be played at a really quick pace and scoring to happen early and often. How is it going to happen? The Pacers will get out and run and do a lot of their damage from within the 3-point line. They score the 4th most 2s per game and shoot the 4th fewest 3s per game, despite shooting a high percentage from deep. Basically, they're going to drive and kick to get their 3s, but a lot of their offense comes in quick succession. They get to the paint and they score quickly. Walker Kessler is going to have to play a huge role if the Jazz want to find a win, because they attack the paint. Pascal Siakam has been great of late. So if you're not super familiar with the Pacers, Tyrese Halliburton, It's their best player. But Pascal Siakam has led the way on offensive late. He got an all-star nod, becoming the 16th pacer ever to be an all-star. Interesting stat there. And he's scoring north of 20, and he shoots 15 a game, which is not that much. And the reason that's important is because they have a very egalitarian attack, which has 7 players scoring over 10 per game. I mean, the Jazz can't just lock up Siakam or Halliburton and expect that to be the pathway to success. It could help. Siakam, past 10 games, 24 a game, 8 boards, shooting 58 from the field. Really, really good. So the second thing I'll be watching. So the first thing is basically, can the Jazz not gift the Pacers points by turning the ball over? The Jazz, if they can minimize their self-inflicted wounds, which put them behind the 8 ball in so many games, the Jazz might have a better chance because the Pacers score a lot of twos in transition. In fact, the Pacers score 15% of their points off of fast break points. And though Indiana doesn't force a ton of turnovers, they do average 8+ steals. And live ball turnovers gift wrap points for the other team, and the Jazz tend to do so. So if the Jazz can minimize turnovers, I really believe the Jazz will be able to score on this Indiana defense and have a chance to win this game. So the second thing I'll be watching is Isaiah Collier. And this is it hand in hand with the first key about minimizing turnovers. In his last 10 games, Isaiah Collier, the rookie from USC, is averaging 13 points per game and 8 assists. And the Jazz haven't had a playmaker like Isaiah Collier since Ricky Rubio. And I say that with a bit of maybe I should go even further back, because Ricky Rubio wasn't as innately gifted at getting to places and creating angles for himself and then creating passing chances out of natural vision and individual creation, getting downhill, seeing things no one else can see. Ricky Rubio was more formulaic, particularly when he was a veteran in Utah, as opposed to the naive youngster that came over from Spain and went to the Minnesota Timberwolves after spending another year in Spain, but playing in the 2008 Olympics against Kobe and the gold medal team. I say all that to say this. I'll be watching Isaiah Collier keenly to see how he handles the increased attention given to him as he has risen up the scouting reports for the opponents. And I'll be similarly interested to see what Keontae George does, because a friend of mine who should be a familiar voice to all of you, Gordy Chiesa, assistant coach under Jerry Sloan for 20 years, calls it shooting angry, meaning Keontae George in his first game after being demoted to the bench shot to prove a point after he was demoted to the bench, and he actually hurt his chances. I think the demotion had more to do with defense, but Keontae George took it, hey, I'm going to score. And he shot shots out of rhythm. I'll be curious to see the comfort of Keontae George and what he does to earn the faith back, or is Isaiah Collier now padlocked in as the point guard on this team? Is he the point guard of the future? And those two, meaning Collier and George, are playing for their futures in Utah. I'm really high on Isaiah Collier, and I think there are signs that he belongs in those future plans. Maybe you do get Dylan Harper, and that changes something because he's that talented. We'll talk about the draft in the future episode, but maybe those talks about, hey, is Keontae in our future plans at the point guard position that Danny Ainge entertained and everyone talked about this offseason? Maybe they're more about Isaiah Collier now than Keontae, and that's just fine. It's the evolution of the NBA. You may be frustrated, Keontae didn't take the leap you expected, but the Jazz have Isaiah Collier, who may be better. He's bigger, tries harder, puts more pressure on the rim, and he's got something that's improving already. Collier's getting to his mid-range jump shot, like he said. He said, I'm just going to get to my mid-range jump shot, and everything's going to get better. Well, he's not a good shooter yet. That's true, but he's getting better. And lastly, if the Jazz are to win, it'll be due to them winning the glass by a significant margin. Indiana ranks 26th in rebounding and 22nd in defensive rebounding, and the Jazz are very good on the glass, as demonstrated by Walker Kessler's leading the entire NBA in offensive rebounding percentage. He gets offensive rebounds at an alarming rate, and the Jazz getting extra possessions by not allowing for transition baskets, by giving up live ball turnovers via leading to fast break points that pace the Pacers. And that's one way to earn extra possessions, is force turnovers and score off of those. And the other way is to get extra chances by creating extra possessions, equating to second chance points. And those often are the deciders in a basketball game, rebounding and turnovers. Well, it becomes more and more apparent that that really matters in today's NBA, because a lot of those rebounds turn into extra possessions where you get to shoot more threes, and the offenses are starting to prevail. So the Jazz, they've played a lot of close games recently, come up short in plenty of them, but I think the keys to playing a close game and perhaps coming out victorious lie in creating extra possessions by rebounding and punishing the inferior rebounding of the Pacers and protecting the basketball. And I'll be very curious to watch the development of Isaiah Collier. And that should excite many people amidst an uncertain time. Like, we didn't have the expectation the Jazz would be good. So maybe these losses are frustrating. But at the same time, the Jazz have put themselves in a position to get Cooper Flagg. By the way, your favorite podcast now is a newsletter, including this one right here. So introducing Locked On Jazz daily newsletter, one stop for your ultimate team and NBA coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with all of the new free Locked On Jazz newsletters coming to you daily. Great insight and analysis. And if you want to read it and you don't have time to listen, I hope you listen, but that gives you a lot of the insights you'll hear here and much, much more. So thank you guys for listening. And it's always a pleasure to talk with you guys. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for a show covering who the Jazz should pick and the updates of the stars of the future in this loaded 2025 NBA draft class, where you're going to hear about the Cooper Flagg. So maybe all these losses will amount to something positive. Who knows? The draft gods will have to tell you then. But I'll be excited to talk to you then, and appreciate you guys listening as always. Thank you.